Okay, thank you for joining today as we listen to Miss Grace Price speak to us about a very important topic that has undoubtedly affected all of us, and that is the upslope of cancer in the past few decades. So, a little bit of background on Grace. Grace Price is not your typical cancer prevention researcher, as Grace is still in high school, but I tell you what, this girl is making big waves, and I cannot wait to see what she does to help us solve this really, really critical problem that we're seeing. And a little bit of context about how I have learned how this is affecting people. I've had over 300 patients in the past few years in the home health setting who have had cancer. And there's a lot of questions that people have. And I can't thank people like Grace enough for helping people not only understand, why we are seeing this rise in cancer, but what we can do about it to stop it. Okay, so be sure to stay to the end as we are going to cover the diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors that are contributing to this alarming rise in cancer, and the actions, this is the most important part, that you can take starting today to reduce your risk. Okay, so with that being said, Grace, you go to the Alpha School in Austin, which is a very special school, and I wish this type of school was available for kids in my generation, or more available for kids now. Talk to us a little bit about why your school is so special, why you're interested in cancer prevention and epigenetics, and most people probably don't know what epigenetics means. So can you break that down for us?
Yeah, no, that's a great place for us to start. So, Alpha High School is a startup school that I first joined when I was in fifth grade. And the craziest part about my school is we have zero teachers. So I learn everything through online apps. And our school day looks very different because of this compared to a typical school day. So, for me in the morning, I come in and I do all of my core subjects on online apps. So this includes math, science, all of the things that you think of when you think of school. And then in the afternoon, however, for high school students, we all have our own Alpha X projects. So what this means is we have set basically these Olympic level goals that we want to achieve within a topic of interest. So mine just happens to be food and epigenetics and how the connection between the two can lead to a new way to prevent or cure breast cancer. And so that is obviously a really big thing to try to find a new way to prevent and cure cancer. But with the time that we're allotted, in the afternoon, I literally can spend 3 hours every single day researching, reaching out to people, summarizing articles. So it's really wonderful the support that we get here. And it's such an awesome school because through learning on online apps, we're able to learn twice as fast as the typical public school kid because we're not held back by the mean of the classroom. Instead, it's all about you and where you are going in your own education journey. So it's really awesome. I already told you a little bit about what my Alpha X project is, but I guess just to go a little bit deeper into why I even like epigenetics, something that's so complex and a little confusing, and nutrition is because well, one, my parents have always been super into health. I was that kid at birthday parties who was refusing to eat cake because I had watched a documentary on how sugar affects us. And I just didn't like the thought that could be eating something that was negatively impacting me and my future, most of all. So I was always that kid. However, I didn't really feel that connected to cancer until I had a cancer story of my own kind of play out in my life, which everyone has their own cancer story eventually. And so mine was with my great grandpa, who I was very close with. He was diagnosed with severe colon cancer. And unfortunately, it was just too late. By the time I think I was told, like, the beginning of one week, I was told he was diagnosed. The end of that week, he had already passed. So it was a very sad time for me. And I was really frustrated because I felt like I literally could have done nothing. And I felt like my grandpa couldn't have done anything in the way that it was positioned because they just told him he had it and they were like, well, these are your options. Looks like this is your chance of survival. And then he ended up passing. And I really couldn't accept the fact that he couldn't have done something before to help prevent that, even if the baseline was just anything that would have some kind of effect on this horrible outcome. And so I started to learn about epigenetics, which in simple terms is just the way that the environment we're in and our lifestyle factors can basically alternate um all the way that the way that these factors can cause certain ways that our genes are expressed to either be like more suppressed or overly expressed. So it's all about the way that they modulate our gene expression, which means that our epigenetics doesn't have to do with DNA, which is a permanent thing that we're given when we're born, unless you're talking about like CRISPR, of course. But our epigenetics are something that are these chemical tags that can be inherited from cell to cell when the cell divides. But they're also reversible, which is what for cancer, specifically because a lot of people think that if cancer is genetic, there's not really much you can do about your DNA itself. But if it's caused by an epigenetic factor, it is reversible. You want to figure out how you could possibly reverse that for cancer.
Right. So like you and I in really like plain terms, like in our DNA, we both might have a light switch, but you might do something to prevent that light switch from turning on, whereas I might do something in whether it's my diet, my lifestyle, or the environment that I'm in that turns that light switch on, which causes cancer. So epigenetics are really kind of like what we should be interested in. Like, what are these factors that we can actually manipulate to reduce our risk of that light switch being turned on in the first place, even though we have it, right? It's not necessarily fate because we have these genes.
No, exactly. The light switch is a great analogy. I've also heard where people say like your DNA is the script and your epigenetics are the actors reading the script because your DNA really doesn't do much if you're not having the right genes being expressed, which
Right.
is like having the action of whatever the gene is supposed to carry out. Um, but yes, and what's interesting about a lot of cancerous cells is they have specific epigenetic profiles that you can distinguish from other cells. One example of this is that certain cancerous cells will have their tumor suppressor genes, which do exactly what it sounds like. They help suppress tumors, completely inactivated or not suppressed, not expressed. And another thing that you'll see is oncogenes, which are genes that allow for cancer proliferation and initiation. Those will be overly expressed in a lot of these cells, which just goes to show that our epigenetics are definitely playing a role.
Yeah, and Grace, you're so passionate about this. So not only do you go to this school that allows you to spend your time on this problem that you're not only curious about, but impacts, like we said, most people we know, they have some sort of cancer story in their life, whether it's a friend, loved one, or themselves. And you're taking it a step further and you're working on a documentary right now. So can you give us a little bit of like a verbal trailer, if you will, about what we can expect from you later this year?
Yeah, so I basically decided to create this documentary um, because I don't really agree with the belief anymore that cancer is purely caused by genetics and just a lack of luck, which is what I feel most people in the US at least think deep down, even if maybe they know, like, oh, yeah, eating healthy is important. No one really associates cancer itself with our lifestyle. Um, Even though 90 to 95% of cancer cases are caused by lifestyle factors and our environment, which goes to show it's having a huge impact. And so the purpose of the documentary is to follow along my journey in the past year as a teen who first wanted to find a cure for cancer and ended up realizing that prevention is the best thing we could possibly be doing right now in order to avoid or quote unquote cure cancer because you just don't get it in the first place. Um, And so the documentary is going to be called Cancer, a Food-borne Illness. And if you follow me on Twitter at Traveling Genes, you can see a ton of updates on it. The teaser trailer is going to be coming out this week, and I'm super excited to show y'all all of the stuff that I found.
Well, I'm very impressed and so proud of you. And you're doing amazing things. So keep it up. And then lastly, you had an amazing experience this past summer where you interned for a big voice in this matter. And can you speak to us about your work with TrueMed Payments this summer and how you're going to leverage that with your upcoming documentary?
Yes, so I had the opportunity to intern at TrueMed, which was actually it was really funny. It was through Twitter, because I had been posting a lot of summaries of the articles that I had been reading, and I reached out to this guy named Callie Means, who I was like, oh, he's got quite a lot of following, and he's pretty big in the health space on Twitter. He basically is a whistleblower for Coke and all of the funds that they are using in order to incentivize unhealthy eating and stuff. And so I DM'd him, and what ended up happening is it led to me being offered a role over the summer as kind of their lead social media person. So I got to run their Twitter account and their Instagram account, and it was so fascinating because I normally spend most of my time looking into cancer, but the goal of TrueMed is to make HSA, FSA spending seamless. And these are basically untaxed dollars that you can use to pay for health products if you are using them to either prevent or alleviate a chronic disease. And with all of this new research that we have coming out on how our lifestyle impacts our risk of developing chronic disease, it's a really great way to be able to afford some of these health products, and also just make sure that you're prioritizing them, instead of some of these other things that might actually lead to chronic disease. So it's really cool. And they have a great mission to kind of counter what our current food system and health system overall is financially incentivizing.
Right. I'm sure that was a good experience for you for this documentary because it'll probably allowed you to zoom out a little bit from your very specific problem and be like, oh, wait, actually, all of these diet, lifestyle, environmental factors that we're about to get into, so stay tuned, actually are going to reduce the risk of other modern chronic diseases like Alzheimer's, forms of dementia, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, name it. So, Grace, let's get into it, the nitty gritty. So can you break down for us some of the big diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors that are causing this alarming rate? And then most importantly, what do we do about it? What can everyday people do starting like after this discussion to reduce their risk?
Yeah, so I would say one of the greatest dietary factors as of right now, um, is, and it's not something very complicated. Like this is just from me looking at graphs of what has really increased the most in the past 50 years. And it's ultra processed food. Over 60% of the average American's daily caloric intake comes from these foods. And I often want to clarify to people like what ultra processed foods really means, because when I first heard, I was like, oh yeah, well, I think of cereals or things that just come in packaging. But ultra processed food means that there's been chemical additives like preservatives, artificial dyes, all of these things that have proven to not be the most healthy for us added to it, along with excessive amounts of refined sugars, refined grains, and sodium. And all of these things in their own ways can increase cancer risk, which is not good. One example is in sodium, the nitrates and nitrites that come out of that can lead to increased breast cancer risk. And so there's a lot of different ways that they impact us. But one of the biggest overarching ways that ultra processed food does this is through inflammation, which if you look at all of the, even outside of ultra processed food, just the things that we eat every day, it doesn't look like real food. It's not something where you'd be like, I found this on a farm or it was grown out of the ground. And so it's not surprising that these foods are wreaking havoc in our body, because it's just not what we're meant to be eating ultimately.
These are
So
new ones. It's like a lot of people in this space, and I've heard you say this too, like if your grandparents didn't recognize it, it might not be that great for you. Or if you can't make it in your kitchen at home, it's probably an ultra processed food, right? So think of like, I don't know, Pop-Tarts. I really harp on Pop-Tarts a lot. Sorry, Pop-Tarts, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. Or like the
every time.
sorry, Pop-Tarts, Doritos, or even like packaged like pancake mixes, like you said, like this kind of stuff is in most pantries and fridges and is about 60% of the American diet. Okay. All right. So that's those. So it sounds like sugar, ultra processed food are two of the big
Yeah.
ones. Okay.
Yeah. And for the rest, I mean, there's also a lot of lifestyle factors, environmental factors that affect this. Some like from ranging from air quality all the way to how sedentary your lifestyle is, whether you get enough sleep and you build up sleep debt, or if you happen to have tap water that contains some kind of metals that aren't the best for you. Even in plastics that we drink like water out of or just soda or any kind of thing, those also contain a lot of elements that are cancer causing. So the list goes on, and it's really scary when you look at it at first because, like I said, most people think of cancer as such a like one-dimensional thing that could have just a single cure, but it's so much bigger than we could have ever imagined. That all of the different kinds of cancers you can develop too are so different from one another. But what I think is the most interesting about these lifestyle factors is they still seem to increase risk for a lot of them overall, which is what makes them also very powerful, I think.
So it sounds like no matter what type of cancer, there's a lot of overlap in terms
Yeah.
of what's contributing to whether you have colon cancer versus breast cancer or
Mm.
even lung cancer, something like that. Okay. So any other big toxins in the environment or lifestyle factors that you want to talk about before we get into some simple things that people can start changing today?
I mean, I would love to dive into some of the simple things they could be
Okay,
changed.
let's do it. Oh, and a quick note, for people listening, if you are interested in ways to reduce your toxins in the home, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jennifer Dunphy out of Southern California, she recently wrote and published a book called The Toxins Handbook. And it's like a handbook, like it sounds, it's really easy. It's a quick reference. I have it in my living room with my other books, and it's available on Amazon. So there's a quick plug for that. It's well written, and it just has like some simple ideas in terms of like quick swaps for like laundry soap, dish soap, things like that, that most people probably just buy off the shelf without even thinking about how it's contributing to their health, but are nowadays pretty affordable swaps too, because there's so much competition in the market for things like this. All right, so let's start with diet, Grace. So what are some big things that we can change today? Whether you are an awesome teenager like you or someone in their 50s just trying to make ends meet and feed their family.
Yes. While there are a lot of different people who have gone down different routes talking about whether a certain diet is better than another, I always think it's best to start with the most minimalistic approach, which is eliminating the stuff that we know is awful, like the most obvious bad stuff. And like I said, the ultra processed foods before, like if it comes in a package versus a version of it that maybe isn't packaged, like simplifying it down to questions like that, or even if it's like if it looks like dessert, it most likely is dessert. And it's something that I
It's organic on the package, Grace. Does
yeah,
that count? Or is it
if
still?
it says that's when it gets a little bit more difficult, Lindy, I will tell you, it does get a little complicated at certain points. And I have actually done posts about because certain food products too will be branded as, oh, this is really healthy, and they'll use keywords like fruits inside of it or something, like when you look at fruit snacks or stuff like that, or veggie chips, and you're like, okay, so you used veggie powder. What's veggie powder to flavor these chips? It's like, I don't think you used actual vegetables in this. So there's definitely some confusing marketing out there, but I think starting with the most obvious is really good. And then maybe doing a little bit of independent research too, because there's so much stuff online now that you can see just to figure out like, are these organic foods actually that good for me? Is this too much sugar to be eating? Even though it says like there's 11 grams, but maybe it's good because it has a lot of fiber or other things, which I could get into fiber too, but there's a lot of different aspects that people think make food better or worse. And then I would say once you decrease a lot of the processed foods, try to increase your intake of foods that have been shown to prevent cancer. So a lot of foods like this include vegetables, fruits, certain spices like turmeric, are all great because they have antioxidant properties that will basically they'll go and they'll eat these little free radicals in your body that can just basically set fire to your cells. They're super damaging. And that is really huge for helping to prevent cancer. They also, a lot of them do affect our epigenetics in really fascinating ways as well. If you look at some of the antioxidant compounds in broccoli, they have really interesting epigenetic effects where they're connected to some of our tumor suppressor genes, and increasing the activation of those. So, and the expression, which I think is really cool. But that is what I would say. Those are kind of like my two rules of thumb for.
Okay, so you're talking like berries, colorful fruits, colorful vegetables,
Yeah.
trying to mix it up. We understand that not everybody tolerates everything, but try to incorporate different colors that work well for your body. Is that what I'm hearing, Grace? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And like fruit, like real fruit, like a strawberry, raspberry, blueberry is going to be superior to a fruit snack. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, to a fruit snack and also superior to even a juice because what you
Oh, juice. Yes.
yep, when you take it out of its even juice, if it's 100% juice and they don't have any added sugar, one, there's typically like 3 apples in a cup of apple juice. That's a significant amount of sugar. Where no one would ever eat 3 apples
Yeah, we
consecutively.
don't binge on apples. Like,
Exactly. But in a juice, you would get that much and be fine because you just are drinking it in liquid form and it's like much easier for you to just drink it up. But in the juice, what happens is that the fructose ends up being separated from the fiber because it's the pulp and the skin that has this fiber that actually allows our body to better digest all of the fructose in the fruit. And so this can cause a glucose spike, which is what we're trying to avoid, to prevent cancer and also just a lot of other disease, like if you're trying to prevent insulin resistance because you don't want to get type 2 diabetes and all these other things. Glucose spikes are definitely things we want to avoid.
yeah, and I think that if any of my listeners have ever tried to make homemade juice at home, you understand. It takes like 8 oranges to make this much juice. And when you do it, you're like, oh, wow, that is a lot of sugar. But it's so easy to gulp down when it's in that like nice bottle that we get at the
Yep.
grocery. So it sounds like it's better to eat an orange that has its natural food matrix with that fiber that's going to help slow that or curb that blood glucose spike that you're speaking of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, juice. And then, it's too bad because it's juice is offered to kids in school lunches. It's offered to my patients at the hospital, alongside 3 bottles of Ensure or Boost. It's everywhere. So we're drinking a lot of sugar out there. And maybe let's circle back to Starbucks later, because that is an addiction that a lot of adults have, and sugar's hiding in
Teens
things.
have it as well. It's very much a teen addiction too.
And I was gonna say, I think it really frightens me about the amount of sugar in it and how much
Mm.
teens love it. Okay, so we talked about some of the diet stuff. Let's talk about the lifestyle stuff. I want to circle back to, you were talking about sleep debt, and I think that's really interesting because I don't think most people would say like, oh, like if I, work like a dog for 30 years and really, don't prioritize my sleep, that's going to increase my risk for something like cancer. So let's dive in a little bit to that.
Yeah, so I think that sleep debt is definitely an interesting thing, but what I've actually found the most interesting about sleep debt is less about like the cancer risk, but more so the increased risk amongst teens of suicide when you have like very little amounts of sleep. It's a very crazy stat when you look at it on kids who are sleep deprived, the likelihood of them developing depression, anxiety, being more irritable, not having more like suicidal thoughts. It's really concerning, especially because amongst my friends, I'm able to see, I mean, no one is prioritizing their sleep. And the current school system, too, like our education system, is not prioritizing sleep either. It's not something that they think is really going to help the kids perform well, even though countless studies have shown that it's
Right.
arguably the most important thing
Yeah,
along with
like
diet.
we repair when we sleep. Like that is our body's repair mechanism, like to sleep so that it can do its cleanup job. So besides like the crazy school demands that most of the kids are experiencing, probably globally, what are some other things that are contributing to this, you think?
Um, for
Like from your viewpoint for like teenagers, like why are we not why are we not sleeping as much as maybe we were 60 years ago? What's going
oh,
on?
yeah, I mean, I would say that I mean, social media definitely has an impact. Kids spend a ton of time on social media before bed, spending time staring at blue light too before bed can also increase risk of these mental health issues too, which is really concerning. I think that a lot of teens also don't really they're not informed on why sleep is important. It's almost like a very interesting thing because I'll talk to my friends about food or sleep and be like, "Oh yeah, it's important to do this." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I know. I've heard that a million times." Because maybe their parents have said so at home, but if they're not, I found that it's really difficult if when the entire like system of health in the US is almost going against them in a way. Like teens are the targets for all of these advertisements on fast food and processed food. It's getting these teens or these kids to see these bright, colorful ads and want to go get that food. Teens are the ones who are being given buttloads of schoolwork where maybe it's not even necessary to have like 5 hours of homework and doing 10 extracurriculars if it means you go to bed at 12 and then wake up at 4 because you have track the next morning. So it's clearly not the priority of our nation to ensure that our teens are going to have a really bright future, especially when it has to do with their health.
Um, Yeah, so more about well, I guess real quick before we move on to like what kids are eating, are there any environmental modifications that you would recommend? Or are there any like simple things that people can change today, like controlling the controllables in their environment to reduce their risk for cancer?
I know I've said this multiple times already, but like using common sense has helped me so much with just trying to avoid a lot of these things that can increase risk.
Yeah.
Because if getting sunlight in the morning is important to reset my sleep, to make sure that I'm avoiding chronic disease, then I know I probably need to prioritize that. But overall, it's like you have to take ownership of your health because there's not a lot of doctors that are going to tell you you should change your lifestyle before they try to prescribe you a drug
Totally.
that's just going to treat whatever it is that you're experiencing. So a lot of it has to do with getting on the computer and looking up whatever you can find, or even I think Twitter is such a great space right now for health.
Yeah. So another environmental thing, I think just some simple tips, and maybe you mentioned this earlier, just like swapping out like plastic containers for glass ones, something like that, or filling up this kind of water bottle versus opting for like a plastic one.
Yeah.
So convenience items are over time um, contributing to our overall health. Some other things like in the home that we might not think about, like what type of laundry detergent we use, those like Febreze sprays that people love to spray in their house, air
Mhm.
fresheners in your car. So
Perfume even as well.
perfume. So sometimes it's not even about like, okay, what can I buy to make my life better? It's like, what can I take away to reduce my risk?
Exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
and that leads me to my next point, which was that we don't live our lives in the mindset that we could actually impact whether or not we get cancer. Like, we just live our lives and we do what we want to do. We maybe buy certain things for convenience reasons, or we maybe choose to eat a lot of ultra processed food just because we like the way it tastes. And then eventually, once we're finally diagnosed with, even if it's not just cancer, chronic disease in general, it's already too late for us to really impact what we've already done, because unhealthy choices have a compounding effect in our lives. So it's harder to see the impact they're going to have until we develop the disease itself. But what's the most interesting about cancer right now is that in the past 3 decades, around um, early onset cancer cases, which is cancers in people under the age of 50, has increased by around 80%. So this, I mean, this in of itself shows that our unhealthy lifestyle choices are now affecting us even earlier in life. It's no longer like a, oh, maybe when I'm older, I'll get this disease. It's that this is going to take away the future of our next innovators, engineers, artists, all of these things, because they're going to have to deal with disease earlier on, because all of these other factors we're just not living according to the fact that this disease is real and that it is coming if we continue to live this way.
Yeah. And like I want to touch on too. So let's say someone does have cancer, which a lot of people do, right? We're just talking about the alarming rates. Um, I like to tell my patients, okay, so you have cancer. What can we do right now? So like let's hit the reset button. So let's fuel our body with like the right foods within your means, right? Oh, and most people have some sort of family or support team to help prepare them food. Um, and I think one of the biggest obstacles I run into with folks that are going through chemo, radiation, immunotherapy is their healthcare providers are encouraging them to continue like drinking sugar calories, be it in the form of Ensure or Boost, which is basically, sugar and these garbage oils all wrapped up into this plastic bottle. People are drinking these around the clock, and they're not cheap. They're expensive, right? And people are seeing them as medicine because hospitals and other healthcare providers are telling them to drink this, or encouraging like, oh, you don't feel well, so just like eat whatever calories you can get in your body. And I think that it needs to be more than that. I think that we really just need to give people the tools. Like, okay, worst case scenario, you can't tolerate anything. Here are a list of items. Give those a try first. Maybe some
Yep.
bone, maybe like a whey protein shake that has like good ingredients for a season boost. So I think what I hope to see change in the next decade in the field of oncology is not just saying like don't eat or drink these things, but like here are some alternatives. Because it's not enough to say don't do this, because then people are like, okay, well then what am I supposed to eat? What am I supposed to drink like during chemo or during radiation or all of
Yeah.
that? Any other thoughts on that? And like I know you worked with TrueMed this summer. Did it give you any perspective about what's missing from maybe a conversation with a healthcare provider and someone who's dealing with an illness?
Yeah. So I completely agree with everything you said. I think what's missing is that it's not there's not an alignment with what we know to have increased risk of chronic disease and what these providers are advising for people to drink and eat. And so this has kind of led to a lot of people trying to they're because they're trying to make healthy choices, but there's so much nutritional misinformation where it just gets really confusing and it's so hard to navigate. I think a great example of this is seed oils, which are quite a controversial topic right now, even though I'm not really sure why, but
I'm not sure
um,
why either, but hot topic,
yeah,
correct.
hot topic. Um, and these seed oils, what happens is they are very high in polyunsaturated fats, which is just a type of fat that it's basically an essential fatty acid because our body doesn't um, produce it itself. We have to get it from our own diet, except this these fatty acids are very unstable. So whenever you cook with seed oils, these fatty acids become oxidized, which is where they just are left in a very unstable form that is going to lead to them either becoming even new compounds, which are carcinogenic. Like one example of this is hydrogen or lipid peroxides, which these can cause free radical chain reactions and damage our cells and our DNA, mitochondria, all of these different things. And then another thing that they can do is they can basically just light fires to all of our cholesterol in our bloodstream. So the cholesterol that carries the fatty acids through our blood, LDL, is often painted as like this evil cholesterol that you don't want to have high numbers of. However, no one brings attention or light to the fact that whenever we have these oxidized fatty acids that our cholesterol are carrying, those fatty acids are then going to oxidize the LDL. And when the LDL is oxidized, it's super unstable and is definitely going to crash into one of your arterial walls. And then that leads to things like atherosclerosis and heart disease, increased risk of cancer, all of these different things. So there's definitely evidence showing that seed oils can have a negative effect. I do think there needs to be more research, of course, like there always needs to be, on like maybe how much of these seed oils are bad, how long when you cook it for, does like what percentage of it oxidized for a certain allotted amount of time. But overall, I think that that's just one example, because if you go to Harvard's website right now, they'll say that seed oils are one of the best sources of omega-6 fatty acids.
Exactly.
So,
They're part of a healthy diet, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of what we're up against, is some of these well-known names are still operating under like antiquated ideas and information. So for me, for seed oils, I see no argument to use them. Like when we have things like grass-fed butter that's literally
Exactly.
available at Costco.
Yep.
In the same price as like other butter. Olive oil, again, go to Costco, or, there's a lot of different fats that we can use. We don't need to be using the corn oil, the canola oil, sunflower oil. And circling back, like these oils, a good way to avoid them is avoid ultra processed food. That's their natural habitat. That's where they live. So a good experiment is to go to next time you're at the grocery store, look at the back of a package. It's really hard to find something that doesn't contain oil. And that can be like your litmus test. All right, this is something that I can skip. What else can I put in my body?
Yep.
So circling back to eating real food. All right, so I want to shift gears and talk about, I'm super passionate about what we're feeding kids at school. I did Teach for America in my early 20s in New Orleans, and it was very eye-opening to see what we were serving for school lunches or school breakfast. And I worked in a school where most of the kids relied on that. That was their big meal of the day. I worked in a 99% free and reduced lunch school. So the kids really, that was like where they were getting the bulk of their nutrition. I'd like to see that change here in the country. I have my own ideas about what we should be serving kids, but Grace, you are a kid, you're still in high school. So what are you seeing, or what did you see maybe at your old school, in fourth grade before you were at this school? And what should we be feeding instead of what's being offered right now?
Yeah, so I'm definitely I share the same passion as you for school lunches, because it's something that, I mean, my my generation currently is being fed all of this stuff. So, it's a very interesting topic. I think that there's kind of two different sectors to it. For high schoolers, what I don't think parents realize is, one, what the school is serving them is just, it's not something that you should be then expecting a high schooler to go and perform well on a test after eating it. Like it's like majority of it is carbs, which is just not great for providing long-term energy for a student, which is kind of what they need to function throughout the rest of their day. And it has very little nutritional value as well. So you'll see a lot of empty carbs on these photos of school lunches, and then lots of sugar as well. You'll always see a chocolate milk or maybe a cookie or whatever kind of dessert they're serving that day, which is just, it's unnecessary to have all of these different kinds of sugar things added to the plate. But what a lot of high schoolers do that parents don't know is that if they're not eating this lunch, then they are going to a vending machine and they're getting their favorite chips or their favorite candy along with their favorite soda. Or maybe they're going to Starbucks, they're getting the Frappuccino that they love. So the sugar is everywhere. Not like it's not only just the school lunches, it's that the alternative is then even worse. It's this kind of mix of like, I'm going to get a lunch, but no one would ever actually call that a true lunch because it has very little nutritional value. So that's a really big issue with high schoolers. And I just think with younger children, before they even have the option to like maybe go and drive somewhere else, or if their parents just don't have enough time to feed them stuff from home, I think it's completely unacceptable what we are currently feeding them in
Yeah,
the
I
public schools.
I agree. I get a lot of pushback on this on Twitter, anytime I talk about it, because most people agree, but then there's always the trolls that are like, oh, their parents should be providing them meals. I'm like, I think you're missing the point. Like, have you been living in this economy? Like, there are some people out there, a lot of people who are struggling and rely on the school to feed their kids. And, it's something that we can change. And this is on the adults in this country. It's unacceptable, as you say, especially when you look around the world and what other kids are eating from other countries. It's appalling. It's
Yeah,
appalling what kids,
yeah,
and then expecting them to do. Oh, expecting you to perform in school, be in your best behavior, not get in fights, ace the test, and then go like play your sports, do your homework, rinse
yeah,
and repeat stay.
right.
Like, it's exhausting. So, and I was one of those kids too. Like you said, like I remember if I didn't like what was being offered, like I remember like bringing like quarters from like babysitting money and just getting like Twix candy bars and like
Yeah.
Snapples were
And
like a
yeah, moving on to the next class after that, because you have things to do and places to be in high school. You're like, I just got to get something quick and move.
right, right. And you think, I think anyway. So I think your voice is really important because kids can hear an adult talk about this, but when they hear a peer speak about these things, I think it becomes more of a real thing, and something that they can relate to. So I hope you keep going with what you're doing, Grace. So when can we expect to see your documentary? Is it going to be later this year, or is that to be determined based on your
Yeah.
interviews? It's
So I would say that it's looking as though it'll be maybe early October when I'll release it. The teaser trailer, like I said, is going to be coming out at the end of this week, and then the official trailer will be next week, most likely. Um, Again, I'm super excited, and if y'all want to follow along on my journey, or even if you just want some tips on how to prevent cancer with your lifestyle and the food that you eat, follow me at Traveling Jeans on Twitter. And I am super happy to chat with anyone too, if you just have any questions in general.
And I will link your Twitter account below so that people can find the trailer for this amazing documentary that's about to come out. And are you on any other social platforms that we should be following you on, or is Twitter your main space?
Yes, so Twitter is currently my main space. I
Sorry,
plan
X.
on
X.
X, sorry, X/Twitter. I do that because I'm like, I don't know if people are gonna still understand what I'm saying if I start saying, yeah, I X'd the other day. So yes, on X. I also I have a couple of things that like I said, I was running TrueMed's Instagram account and Twitter account over the summer. So following TrueMed payments also would be great. I've helped create a lot of the stuff that's on their profiles there. And also you just totally should, because if you have HSA, FSA funds, they are the best way to spend them in a way that will help you prevent chronic disease. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So using something that we already have towards something that's healthy and good for us. Love that. Love that. Anything else you want to share with us, Grace, before we end?
I think that's all, but thank you so much for having me, Lindy. This
Yes,
was
it
so
was such a
awesome.
pleasure. And I'll be the first to say I'm so excited for your documentary and all the change that comes of it. So thank you, Grace.
Yes, thank you.